Sorry about the noisy chair. Hi, everybody. Welcome, and thanks for joining us after what I'm sure was a raucous night. It certainly was for us. I'm Julie Pizzetti. I'm Global Director of Research at the International Centre for Journalists and Professor of Journalism at City University in London. I also serve on the board of the International Fund for Public Interest Media, as does the woman sitting next to me, who is the co-chair of that institution. And Maria Ressa, who probably needs no introduction, but I'm going to give her one anyway, won the Nobel Peace Prize with another journalist in 2021 for work countering disinformation and defending press freedom and facts. She also is the co-founder and CEO of Rappler and a professor at Columbia. And sitting next to her is Gillian Green, who is the newly ensconced, I guess, semi-freshly ensconced editor-in-chief of the Daily Maverick, which is an epic and just groundbreaking in many ways, like Rappler is in the Philippines, investigative outlet in South Africa. And then we have Professor Emily Bell, who is the director, the director of the Tao Centre for Digital Journalism at Columbia University. So I'm really glad to have these stellar women with me, and it's just occurred to me that they are in fact all women. So I think after Mona's outstanding entreaty, this feels very fitting. And so we're here to discuss the question of trust in journalism, and to problematize that concept with new data. So we've titled this panel, Broken Trust, Time to Abandon a Manipulated Metric. Notice there's no question mark there. Based on the evidence, I'm making that assertion, and this is associated with a long-running ICFJ research project called Disarming Disinformation, which has included global surveys, representative surveys in 5 countries. And that's what the data from which we will focus on today, along with the lived experience of journalists and qualitative research that we've done in the same countries. So just to frame this for you and to put some data around the narrative, our thesis is that it's time to abandon the trust metric as it's currently routinely applied to journalism. So we think it's no longer fit for purpose in the context of disinformation-laced attacks on individual journalists and the outlets that they serve and the communities they serve. And it's important to note that these disinformation-fueled attacks frequently seeded by political actors and facilitated by big tech. And not only are they facilitated by big tech, but as Elon Musk has so amply demonstrated, sometimes instigated by billionaire tech oligarchs. So it's no coincidence that big tech companies have funded projects that have promoted narratives focused on journalism's problem with trust. And we've also seen many media development projects focused on trust erosion and how to remedy this trust, with the assumption that all of this effort should be on the plate of the journalists or the news organisations themselves. And frequently they are conducted without consideration of digital disinformation, big tech culpability, and threats to press freedom, which have all skewed the audience development work that's undertaken and further imperiled journalists who are at risk. We also have a problem with uncritical and decontextualised research on public trust in journalism, which has at times delivered easily manipulated data and increased the risks faced by journalists in the countries where the research has been conducted. And this is really important to note and address in the context of rising authoritarianism and polarisation, a climate in which truth-tellers are routinely demonised and gaslit as fake news and enemies of the people, as President Trump has so frequently said, by political and corporate actors seeking to avoid accountability. So I want to reframe this concept of trust erosion as trust corrosion In other words, there are external factors that are contributing to the decline in trust that have to be understood. So we've polled, through our surveys conducted last year, over 1,000 adults in 5 countries, and we're now able to connect the bullying of the press and digital disinformation with declining trust. So the data points to startling levels of tolerance for political attacks on the press and disrespect and a lack of understanding about press freedom, and that's despite existing concern about disinformation, including digital disinformation in those countries. So the 5 countries we've studied are the US, the Philippines, South Africa, Brazil, and Georgia. And today we're going to focus on the first 3, the US, the Philippines, and South Africa. And I just want to start with some of the data from the US study, and then I'll give you an insight into the data points to come. So the US, some of the US data we've published, the other data is yet to be published, so you're getting a preview here. So just ahead of the US election, we published an outcome from the poll which included that 29% of Americans said they had no trust in journalists. 27% said they had often seen or heard a journalist being threatened, harassed, or abused online. Over a third thought it was appropriate for senior politicians and government officials to criticise journalists and news organisations, and nearly a quarter didn't regard political attacks, abuse, and harassment from senior politicians on journalists or news organisations as a threat to press freedom. In the Philippines, where Maria is from, and where she still leads a news organisation, 26% of the 1,000+ people we polled, and a reminder, this is nationally representative, we polled adults, so it's actually scientifically accurate to say that 26% of Filipinos said they had no trust in journalists, but 32%, nearly a third, approved of senior government officials attacking, abusing, and harassing journalists, and 38% said that such attacks did not pose a threat to press freedom. In South Africa, the data is similar. So we see around a quarter, 23% of adults saying they had no trust in journalists, and 18% of them approving of political attacks on journalists, while 22% said the attacks had no bearing on press freedom. So I know that's a lot of data to take in at 11:30 on a Friday morning after a big night, but I wanted to set the scene and to put some figures around what we're seeing. And now I want to involve these exceptional women in this conversation. So Maria, you have actually lived through, which we at ICFJ and others have documented through research and commentary and so on, disinformation-laced attacks that resulted in you being called, for example, the Queen of Fake News, pertinently being called a criminal years before you actually were prosecuted following the persecution that you experienced and convicted for a crime, pardon me, that was connected to libel, and many of you will know Maria's story in detail, so I won't go back through that. But this is to say that the disinformation narratives that were seeded as a way of enabling your persecution and prosecution were really relevant to the trust metrics associated with Rappler in the Philippines. And I just am interested to hear from you both about the ways in which you have experienced both the impacts of these disinformation narratives and the targeted attacks, which were seeded by adherents to the Duterte regime and, in fact, from within the palace, but also how you have perceived that to have affected trust and how, as a result, you view the debates about trust in journalism.
I mean, many of you here. So first of all, thank you so much for coming in the morning. And I'll throw this back. We have all the data from the Philippines. If you want it, we can share it with you. It is, both cross-platform and, because the best part, when you become the target of attack, it's a curse and a blessing. A curse because you feel the attacks. I was getting an average of 90 hate messages per hour, 90 per hour. And then when Facebook told me, but maybe you should report them, I'm like thinking there aren't enough hours in the day to report 90 hate messages per hour. But when you get that much, then you don't have to ask the platforms for data because you got it all. So that's the upside of it, right? That's how we actually discovered how all of this worked. So this is it's both data-driven and experiential for me, and that has given me great certainty. So every time someone says, well, you journalists have to do something about trust, I'm like, well, you know what? Like the context of how we operate, when you measure trust, do you measure the amount of disinformation, the attacks on the journalists? And so let me say this first. We at Rappler were the third news group attacked by President Duterte in 2016. And the way it works is, bottom-up social media attacks. You're attacked and pounded to silence. And if you decide not to, if your news group is going through this, please let us know. We created systems where the person getting attacked, I was already in my 50s, but I had a young 25-year-old, 26-year-old reporter who were getting attacked almost as much as I was. And so they do not respond, but our team did, right? So we swarmed it is what we called it. Then it wasn't possible because the algorithms of these platforms just made it worse. So bottom-up social media attacks, they seed a meta-narrative. That meta-narrative takes hold. It's like a virus of lies. And then the government came a year later in 2017, top-down, with cases that validated the lies coming bottom up, right? So legal cases, weaponization of social media, weaponization of the law. And then that was 2018, 21 cases and investigations. They announced this is all fought publicly. There's no reality involved. And then 2019, I just kept getting arrest warrants. And, I have to say thank you, Keelan Gallagher. She's sitting in the audience. In the Philippines, more lawyers have been killed under the Duterte administration than journalists. So we need the lawyers. I like walking around Perugia with my lawyer now. 2019, 10 arrest warrants in a little over a year. And then 2020, I was convicted. It's been 9 years since 2016. I have won 8 of the 10 cases, although the government keeps pulling them forward. But I still have 2. In order to be here, I have to ask the Philippine Supreme Court for approval to travel. I have to say after the Nobel, they haven't denied it. But what does it do? Until today, some Filipinos still believe I'm a criminal. And I guess because I was convicted, I am, right? So this is how the law is weaponized, and this is how lies become real. And so if you're in a country, and actually all of us are, where this is the public information ecosystem, it's happening to you. And so how do you fight back? You hold the line on facts. You keep going. Sorry, let me just say the end part of this, which is 3 years ago, we decided that big technology is not anchored in reality or facts. The technology that is ruling our lives is disengaged from facts and used far more to insidiously manipulate us in the public information ecosystem. I have data to prove this for you. She has data, and she has data, and she has data. So what do we do?
We'll come to what do we do, I think, a bit later.
But,
so let me.
Okay, fine. Yes, okay.
I mean, far be it from me.
I'm just saying it's not hopeless.
That's an important note to come back to. But I just want to tease out the sort of implications for trust, though, of all of this. And the best anecdote I have with reference to you, Maria, is actually being in a taxi in Amsterdam at the end of 2019. So this is before your conviction, but well and truly into the period after which you'd been arrested multiple times and the charges had been laid. And the taxi driver asked me what I was doing in Amsterdam, and I was speaking at a conference, the name of which I can't remember, about some research I'd done for the Reuters Institute about the ways in which Global South news organizations were trying to fight back against disinformation. And he asked me about this is interesting, like which countries are you looking at? And I said, well, the Philippines, and particularly at a journalist called Maria Ressa. And he then stopped and said, she's a criminal. This is not a Filipino Dutch taxi driver. This is a born in the Netherlands Dutch taxi driver who happened to be married to a Filipino, who said he knew all about Maria and all of the lies she told. And the fact that this is kind of, it's networked.
It's specifically micro-targeted to the overseas Filipino workers.
Yeah. So this distrust in you that was global even at that point really struck me as very consequential, because as you just said to me when we were walking down here, one of the reasons you went back to the Philippines was because you were hired on the back of your credibility as a foreign correspondent for CNN, right? And so here we are in a situation where that credibility has been torn down, and yet we, as a community of journalists and scholars, I think have been guilty of constantly referring to audience-based trust data uncritically.
I think what you have to be careful about, when we talk about polarization, it's the same thing in terms of tearing down trust for journalists. When you get targeted, and we have been targeted in every country around the world, because the first way you break down trust is to break down the trusted information sources. Because without trust, you have nothing, right? The only form of government that works in an environment where there is no trust is a dictatorship. So that's part of what we've learned. And what we did in Rappler is we knew after the end of the 6 years of Duterte that Rappler had taken body blows. And over the since 2022, I can tell you technologically what we are doing, because you need to have an anchor in tech and not in insidiously manipulative technology using surveillance for profit. But I will say, we are under attack, right? And trust is this metric that is not standalone. And even if you, the journalist, wants to work on it, it isn't in our hands, because the distribution of news, the gatekeepers, are big tech.
Yeah, so theoretically, no amount of work on transparency and audience development and journalistic accountability, all of which are important, are going to be able to trump, excuse the pun, the targeted attacks on journalists and news organizations. Gillian, can I come to you? I'm interested first in your reaction to that data that you saw for the first time earlier today about journalists and public attitudes towards journalists and press freedom in South Africa. Does that resonate? Does it ring true? Or you looked alarmed, but I don't know if you were shocked.
Thanks, Julian. Thanks for having me on this panel. Alarmed, yes, but shocked not, because the lived experience of our journalists on the ground every day is questioned. The work they do is questioned and interrogated to the point of where doubt starts to creep in. Actually, have I got this right? Are my sources being manipulated? And so those metrics that you mention are shocking, but not alarming. And we've got to look at what is our role in that. Journalists are human. We make mistakes, and those mistakes are capitalized on immediately. And so the pressure we put ourselves on to get it right needs to increase. And constantly do.
Yeah, I mean, that's a really important point to make. We're not here saying that journalists are flawless and faultless, and that they don't have work to do to serve communities better, which includes, obviously, re-upping a commitment to accuracy and verification and reliability and so on. But And in fact, my team at ICFJ and I have studied several Daily Maverick journalists as the subjects of gender-based online violence, which has included very significant disinformation narratives, and Maria as well, as part of earlier work. But in the case of South Africa, we've seen, a resurgence of race-based disinformation narratives, for example, that are brought to bear. And I'm just interested to understand from you how much harder it is to try to both build trust with audiences in a country that is as diverse and potentially as polarized as South Africa is, and also how much harder it is to deal with the abuse of platforms and the algorithmic manipulation of information, including disinformation, and the amplification of that. So how much harder does it become for Daily Maverick to develop trust in your journalism?
Look, I think those points that you point out of the polarization of the diverse audiences that we serve are all hills that we have to climb in developing this trust with our audience. We note that when we have a big investigation or publish a big investigation, the attack increases. The kind of messaging and manipulation of the investigation that goes out it's almost as fast as we can press publish.
Yeah.
And it's organized. And so for us on our side is to preempt that almost, to be aware that it's going to happen and plan for it. I think the time of us just putting stuff into the ecosystem that is already so polluted is gone. We've got to look at what is going to happen to that piece of journalism once it goes out into the world. How is it going to be manipulated? How do we preempt that, and what is our strategy to respond to it? And it's a learning curve, because tech has the resources. They have the platform. The algorithms are against you. Your journalism is fighting for space with the latest trending cat video. And to find ways where we can create the space for good factual investigations that are reaching audiences where they are. And I think that's something that we have to talk about, is our journalism can be elitist and intellectual. And when we are trying to engage with audiences who are being manipulated, and we must face that fact, the audiences are being manipulated. What are we doing with our journalism to reach them where they are, in the ways that they want to consume the information? We've got to stop writing for each other. Look how clever I am. I've been able to dig into this and investigate it, and this is how I've done so. But it's going completely over the top of the head of the audience, that you actually want to be able to use the information for their own growth, for their own opinion forming, for their own decision making, for their ability to navigate life in a very diverse, polarized, and factional society.
And in a country with 11 official languages, where there is still limited access to the internet, despite the fact that the internet is well and truly influencing narrative discourse and democratic deliberation. And let's come back to that, because I'm interested to learn from you how you are trying, for example, to access township communities which are utterly marginalized still, and Daily Maverick is serving, an AB demographic, as we used to refer to it. So I think there's a lot we can learn from you about that. But Emily, I want to come to you now, because all of this, is very real. Targeted attacks, network disinformation. You're viewing this both from the US, which is, the front line currently, at least in the Western context, for disinformation operations and efforts by journalists to try to counter those. But at the same time, you have led research for over a decade looking at platform power abuses. And we have had many discussions over the years about the role of the platforms in undercutting trust in journalism, but in particular, the piece of work that they've done to boost discussions and debates and work on trust, and to constantly foreground the responsibility of journalists to solve the problem of trust without any acknowledgement of their own culpability. I mean, I am well and truly over being lectured by big tech executives about trust. Don't get me started on their recent foray into lecturing us about democracy. But I am also kind of very dubious about, recent projects, for example, like the Facebook Journalism Trust Project. And I would like to know from you, Emily, how you therefore regard the culture and the emphasis on trust and the framing of trust as a problem in the context of everything we now know about big tech actors.
Thanks, Julie. Thanks for being here this morning early. Great to be on a panel with these amazing women. I feel as a journalism professor from Columbia, it's a good idea if I make a few more enemies, because I'm just in danger of pleasing too many people at the moment, particularly those in power. So your question, Julie, about tech platforms and research agendas and how we view journalism and what their role in that is. I think that's a big question. I think two things can be simultaneously true. I believe quite a lot of good intention and quite a lot of good work has come out of some of that investment. But I do remember, I don't know if Richard Gingras is here. He may not remember this, but I do. I was at Newsgeist about 13 years ago, maybe 12 years ago, and I remember Richard very clearly saying the number one problem that journalism has is trust. And I had the misfortune to be old enough to have sat in circulation meetings of newspapers, which are those big foldy things you occasionally see in the, and I remember very vividly how I was very excited as a young editor on a folding newspaper that our newspaper, which at the time was The Observer in London, had 80% trust ratings among its own readership. And I was like, this is amazing. We are an incredibly well-trusted brand. And our chief executive turned to me and said, you do realize that cross town, the Daily Mail, who we consider to be not at all like us, they're looking at their trust numbers, and their trust numbers are saying exactly the same thing. They are 80% trusted, and their trust numbers will be saying that we are 20% trusted, which was pretty much what ours said about the Mail. And I thought, wow, okay, so trust is not this immutable, one and done standard. So when Richard said the number one problem that journalism has is trust, I kind of put my hand up and said, oh, I disagree, and I was never invited back. But I think that sort of in seeking to address, what is it that we can do to make journalism work, it's become a useful metric for the funding in journalism research, which has largely come from technology platforms, to decide what the agenda is. So you'll read a lot of trust metrics which are produced, I think, in good faith by research organizations that say journalism is not well trusted. And it's been declining. It's actually been declining since the early 60s. This is the other thing, that when you work for a great university and you have great colleagues who study history, you can go down the corridor, someone like Michael Shudson would say, well, actually I found what he wrote because I knew I wouldn't remember it. So, in 1952, Adlai Stevenson, who was Democratic presidential candidate, he ran against, on his platform, he ran against what he called the one-party press. But of course, the thing was, it didn't matter because you couldn't get your news really from anywhere else. You had no options. This sort of refocusing by both public relations companies, so Edelman, have a trust barometer. Edelman's business is to make money out of repairing trust. The platforms, particularly Facebook, has put a lot of money into the Trust Project, a lot of money into trust in journalism research. I'm not saying we don't have problems. I'm just saying I think the fact that that line has been going down is one problem, but it's embedded in an environment which has really been about trashing journalism's currency, that trashing has come from tech platforms, it has come from politicians. A couple of years ago, I sat outside the Brufani had the honor of talking to the rather brilliant Carlos Dada, who, like Maria, has fought press repression in El Salvador. And I said to Carlos, what's the problem? And he said, for the first time really in history, politicians are genuinely outrunning what we have been able to do in the media. And the message that they are conveying and the trust that they are building is that we are untrustworthy and we don't really have an adequate answer to that, or that is a difficult question to answer. So I think, sorry, Julie, I know I should be this. So I think that we've allowed ourselves to be distracted by a couple of, if you like, sort of talking points, which is how do you repair your trust? I think Jill is absolutely right, which is how do you reach your communities with information that matters at the time that it matters. We've also been, I would say it's kind of interesting because they also fund a lot of research into, say, news avoidance. News avoidance is a new thing. I don't see many of my colleagues at Columbia or our students avoiding the news. I don't see many people in the Middle East avoiding the news. I don't see many people in Ukraine avoiding the news. It's like, one of the jobs of journalism is to be there when, I was going to swear, but my boss is in the front row. The great Jelani Cobb. When, as might be said by somebody other than me, when shit gets real, you need the news. You absolutely need the news. And so I think that obsessing on some of these metrics has not helped us. It hasn't derailed us, but it has not helped us. And what we have to all realize is that we are in an information war.
Exactly.
We are in an information war, and we're not doing well. And one of the key tenets of an information war is you invert the truth and you discredit the press. And this is as old as Goebbels. This is probably even pre-Goebbels. And it hasn't, the basic playbook hasn't changed. So can we repair trust in an environment where our biggest enemies say we are not to be trusted? And when we measure that, and when we pay for people to measure that, what is it we are really doing? Are we really improving journalism? I think the answer is sometimes we are, but sometimes we're ignoring the fact that when you ask newsrooms, what is undermining trust in journalism? We ran this research at the Tower Centre in 2018. 83% of everybody we polled in a 2,000-person poll in a newsroom, 83%, the number one undermining factor for journalism at the time was social media and platforms. I'm not sure that was, I don't think it would be the same if you polled it now. I think they would say political opposition.
I think both, but I want to just pull out, I want to pull out a strand of what you said. Look at news avoidance. This is an easier one, right? Do you avoid the news, or do you not get it served to you on the platform? You actually don't get it served to you. So last year, 74 major elections around the world, right? And yet, what happened in January 2023 is Meta choked traffic to news sites, and it was a choking of between 50% to 85% globally. So you were not served that. So did you avoid it, or were you not served that? I think this is the same thing as trust. The core of it is, if you say a lie 1 million times, information operations, it becomes a fact. This was the 2018 MIT study that said lies spread 6 times faster. It's far worse today, right? So chicken or the egg is the question.
The other thing that's relevant here is the work that the platforms did to try to shift responsibility for dealing with disinformation solely and wholly to media literacy, media and information literacy education. So it was the audience responsibility to get skilled up.
It's your fault.
Yes, like it's journalists' fault for trust corrosion, and not actually acknowledge any complicity in the problem of viral disinformation. And what I want to get to now, though, is all of those things are linked. But what happens when data, saying that Rappler is the least trusted news organization, for example, in the Philippines, is
sure.
published and shared? Like, how does that then further affect you?
Oh my God. Okay. Well, first of all, I have to say, look at our Columbia. My co-professor at Columbia, Anya Schifrin, is also here, along with the dean of the journalism school.
I don't want you to get the impression that literally everybody from Columbia is here.
Yeah, I know, but you never hear from us. So
we haven't run away. We're going home. Well, they're going home. I don't. I have a green card, so who knows? But sorry. Yes.
So let me tell you a story. I sat on the board of the Reuters Institute for School of Journalism for 4 years or longer, but it does a survey, and this is one of the things I think everyone needs to shift. We need to look at the quickly changing environment. It does a survey that it has done for a very long time and didn't want to change it even as the atmosphere had changed. So the first 4 years, they did a trust survey in every country. When the Philippines, even before the Philippines was included, I pointed out, you got to really look at social media penetration, and you have to look at how disinformation, how information operations are targeting journalists. Year 1. Year 2, the Philippines was included, and then I saw, this is where I saw in the Philippines, the news organizations that were fighting back against a dictatorship were the ones who were least trusted. Again, I have all the data. So I go back, year 2, to say, you're doing this wrong. Let me not use the word wrong. You can do better by actually putting full context of what the tech-enabled silencing of journalism, of what is happening in every one of our countries. Nothing happened. Year 3, I went to the funders, and then I went to Year 4, I got tired of it, because the little graphic that they had released then was used by all the information operations against us. And don't look at the Philippines alone. I was sitting, I think we were at the Deutsche Welle summit when the report was rolled out, and I was sitting next to Patricia Campos Melo from Brazil. I was sitting next to an Indian journalist, next to one from Hungary, across the board. The news organizations that were least trusted, and it was audacious to put it that way, were the ones fighting back, that had legal cases, right? So that is very real, and we now in the academe, the good part, let me say the good part. I resigned from the board and I publicly stated it, and I hope it has gotten better, but this is for every one of us. So now in the academe, the good part of Duterte attacking Rappler is that we pivoted in 2018 to find another sustainable business model. Because when he tried to shut us down in January, they went to our advertisers, and so we dropped 49% of our advertising revenue. And the way we survived was data. Looking at how we were being manipulated, not data in surveillance capitalism, but telling you, like journalists, this is what you are not seeing, and pushing greater transparency. The platforms, social media in particular, and now of course you have generative AI, the platforms have that data, and if they were run by journalists, that would be published.
Yeah, it's a really important point about, in the context of AI, large language models, we now know predictably being polluted with disinformation by nefarious actors. So this is, going to make the situation so much more difficult to deal with. But Gillian, in terms of the content that Daily Maverick delivers, the journalism rather than the content that Daily Maverick delivers in difficult circumstances, this challenge around how to surface it, because we have, for example, Elon Musk announcing once Trump was re-elected and he was, on his way to Dogeville, that we are the media now, you are the media now, his ex-followers, at the same time as manipulating the algorithm to embolden and further perpetuate far-right voices, including the far-right party in Germany, for example. So often discussions around, the debate now, like we need to move towards news influencers to counter news avoidance, and news influencers building large audiences, some of whom are outstanding and creative, and yes, have a vital role in, the news ecosystem. But is this another issue that we need to consider in the context of algorithmic manipulation? So, how will your content get surfaced online if it's being shut down via the manipulation of the platforms on which it's being shared? So I know, this is common to Rappler and Daily Maverick, and one of the other news organizations we're studying in this project, actually Code a Story, which was born in Georgia. You're all looking at kind of live journalism, building these deeper connections with communities and being present in those communities as a way of trying to counter this. And while acknowledging that you are still going to be drowned out in digital spaces, what value do you store in that kind of approach with reference to developing trust?
So just to say, Elon Musk is not our greatest export from South Africa. And the US, you guys can keep him.
Don't look at me. I'm not going to say I'm not a citizen yet again, because that's now becoming. But yes, we'll. Okay, fine. They can keep. They can keep him.
No, but in terms of how do we actually serve our journalism to our audiences is a key question that we have to ask ourselves every day. And I think in that statement is the answer: is our journalism of service to the audiences that we are trying to reach? In this maelstrom of information, where everybody can share news and share information, why spend time with Daily Maverick and Daily Maverick's journalism? What benefit is it going to have on your life? And then when you do decide, at which point do you want to engage with our journalism? Is it through live webinars? Is it through podcasting and video work? Is it through long-form journalism? Is it through the comment section? And we've got to look at how we package this information in ways that are sticky with our audience. One of our most successful methods of distributing our journalism is through our newsletters.
Yeah.
In the elections last year, our readership went up from 7 million monthly uniques to 14 million, which told us that actually our audience is looking for information to help them navigate this really contested election. One of the most successful kinds of products that we put out was a gamification of the political parties' manifestos in a manifesto card game. I'm sure you all know Trump cards. and you took these really dense, boring political manifestos and put them into a way that readers were suddenly engaging with the content of what political parties were canvassing on. Whether we can correlate that to the outcome of an election is a little bit harder to prove, but we do know that they were engaging with it. They sent us pictures of it up on office walls or shared via WhatsApp. Methods.
And I should say, my colleague Nabila Shabir and I were embedded with Daily Maverick during the election last year, and we'll be publishing a report from our Disarming Disinformation project focused on Daily Maverick by the middle of this year. And one of the things we observed too was, your work to try to make your journalism more accessible in multiple languages, just that basic level of accessibility, and audio as a kind of alternative. And we've seen that in multiple other newsrooms. Emily?
And summaries, Julie, because, the long form can be off-putting when you are time constrained. We don't have a commuter commuter public that is accessing the newspapers on the train. It's all here. So data is expensive. What's the quickest way that I can get a sense of what's happening without necessarily eating up the data that I need to use to find the job? And being mindful of all the different levels of audience that we might have and engage with along the way is important.
So Emily, I'm interested, all of that is really helpful and valuable. Thank you, Jill. But from your perspective, Emily, how do journalists, and let's think about the US at the moment, where there are such prolific attacks on the AP, being banned from the White House, although with, legal success in recent days, maybe overturning that, because they stuck to the facts and referred to, the Gulf of Mexico as the Gulf of Mexico instead of the Gulf of America, and it's one of many examples. So the AP is not to be trusted, according to the administration. But how can journalists resist this narrative that journalists are not trusted and that they must address this trust deficit themselves exclusively?
Well, so the fortunate and unfortunate thing is we have rich and recent precedent everywhere. So this has happened to Maria, it's happened in Hungary, we are lucky to learn from our students, so we have students who have worked in these environments and they come freighted with very recent knowledge of what happens if you say the wrong thing or cross the wrong line in democracies like India. This is a kind of, we are surrounded by, and this is a great venue for people to come together and hear these things from each other. What do you do as an American journalist? I think we saw the AP stood up. I think Resistance, there are 2 books which I'm lucky enough to teach 2 classes at the moment, one which has disinformation in the title and the other of which is called Information Warfare Reporting, which I always say to my students, I know it sounds very dark, this is actually a fun class, because we're going to learn how we can we're going to learn what the techniques are, how information is manipulated. We're going to learn how to investigate this stuff. I didn't say it was a fun class this year, but it's a vital class. You hear, we have the material. There's Maria's book, How to Stand Up to a Dictator, which is just an absolute how-to manual. I've also been reading, which is very dark, there's a brief history by an AP journalist of the Munich Post, which is what happened to the last newspaper that stood up to Hitler. And what was kind of actually quite interesting about that is, again, in the context of the times, the Munich Post did lots of journalism that we would probably not approve of. It could be a bit of a scandal sheet. It could have could over-exaggerate things. But when the chips were down, it did what mattered, which is it carried on reporting in the most difficult environments. And I think, there isn't really a whole amount you can do other than just keep reporting and thinking about the people who, as Jill says, really need that information. And I have to say that I don't want anyone to think we don't think there's a problem with trust. I think, 2 things can be true at the same time. We're being put under pressure on this one metric, but actually, we do need to reach people and we need to have people readers. To your point about influencers, did anyone see V. Sefar yesterday, Under the Desk News? Hands up, anyone who did? Does anyone know V. Sefar, Under the Desk News? Does anyone follow it? I'm unlucky enough to have been catastrophically immersed in TikTok as part of my job. I got slightly sort of sucked into the rabbit hole, but because of that, I actually see and follow a lot of her output. She's a news influencer. She's on a Shorenstein Fellowship. I walked with her 20 yards from the bus stop to the Brufani when we first arrived, and every teenager, Italian teenager, she's American, every Italian teenager started to take pictures and whisper to each other. We sat and had a cup of coffee, and there were constantly everybody under the age of 25 was kind of electrified. And I was like, I don't think that, the professional community of journalists quite realize how this has changed. I think intellectually we realize it. I thought intellectually I realized it. I didn't really feel it until that moment. And I was like, it's like going down the road with Maria. That's the only other parallel in journalism. So I sat and talked to her and said, how do you do this? And it is constantly thinking about how can I relate to my followers? How can I tell them this? How can I relate it? And so I think, we can do it. It's just a lot at the moment.
Yeah.
I think we also have to acknowledge it's a lot as well.
And it needs to be done critically and in the context of all that is swirling, that's disruptive.
And it's a multi-stakeholder effort. So it's not just influencers, it's not just...
Yep, exactly.
It's not just, kind of deep investigative reporting. But we are going to need all of that. We're also going to need a record of what has happened. And I think that's the other thing that we are under pressure on.
But I would push back because I don't want to be an influencer. No offense, influencers, right? I mean, and if a journalist, I worry about this with our young reporters in Rappler because then it becomes about you, and we older journalists have always said it's not about us, right? Then it becomes about you. Look, we're at the tail end. I just want to quickly say 3 things. One is that there are no safety laws in place. So there were 2 ways that we were fighting back. One was regulations. And look at how big the tech lobby came back just at the EU when they were debating the Digital Services Act, 125 million euros, just for that time period. So the first is, if this is a polluted river, and when you're saying, so if the reporter was only after clicks, likes, links, followers, it actually goes against the essence of what journalism is, because you cover stories that not many people can care about, but you make them care about it because it affects their lives, right? This goes back to editorial. Who has editorial control? You have both. We can have both. It does not have to be pollution over substance. And it isn't just the form. So the first is regulations. Put those regulations in place. But of course now with the US where it is, with Doge, with Elon Musk, with the oligarchy, we know where it's headed, but we still keep fighting. The second is, look at the tech. Right? As a journalist, when you're covering this, when you're covering the rise of the far right in your country, take a look at how they did it online. And take a look at how journalists, women, in particular, gendered misogyny, and the second one, the 2 fracture lines in almost every one of our countries, gender, and the second one is race. And deeply connected to race is immigration. In the United States, we did a survey that showed that almost every single meta-narrative that's spread on Facebook, on social media, were lies, but amplified, and then amplified by the most powerful, by the candidate himself. So anyway, to go back, build tech. We have to learn to become experts at the distribution and regain control of this so that we tell people transparently, this is what the algorithm is doing to you, right? And this is part of the reason we started building the Matrix Protocol chat app, 150 million addressable users on the Matrix Protocol. I dream of a global federation of news organizations where information integrity, where people are held accountable for the lies, for the attacks, and journalists can go back to doing our jobs of holding power to account.
Thank you, Maria. We have to end it here. I really wanted to be able to come for questions, but I think there was a lot to say. And one more thing I want to say is that I mentioned the AP's struggle in the US, and the AP's General Counsel, Karen Kaiser, is in the audience. She's up next with Keelan Gallagher talking about challenges to press freedom. So please stay for their panel as well. Thank you so much for listening to us and participating in your own way. Thank you.